Hello, Pomona city officials, law enforcement, city attorney's office, etc. My name is Eric Strauss. I'm making this video primarily to summarize stuff really quickly and make it at the top of the videos so that you don't have to dig around. The video that the actual evidence is, I'll link in the description of this video. But I'll summarize my purpose, my desired outcome, I'll summarize it all for you right here in as straightforward a fashion as possible. Additionally, I want to say, if you've watched some of my previous videos on this, which are still up there, but I apologize for being rude and or arrogant in those. It took me a while to understand that this is a circumstance that doesn't require me to be fueled by passion in any sense, because I'm entirely in the right, and what I'm doing actually is right. It's not just a justification that I'm providing or something like that. So it's causing me to kind of relax about the whole thing a little bit. Anyway, the situation is this: the Pomona police were tasing some guy way too much. And so I started shouting at them from the median to stop tasing him. Now, he had enough, basically. So what happened was an officer who was, maybe some few feet that way from me, towards the action. So the officer was between me and the action that was happening with the tasing. And I was standing where he represented the line where you couldn't go past. So I was standing on the correct side of the line. And he came over and hit me in the ribs with the butt of his beanbag gun. I think it was a beanbag gun. It looked kind of like a shotgun, but I think it was a beanbag gun. And said, get out of here, go away, whatever he said. You can see the video, what he said. I don't even remember. But the point is, he assaulted me because he didn't like what I was saying. He didn't like what I was saying because it tickled his conscience. It was correct that that guy had enough, that they had no further reason to be tasing him additionally, that he was well subdued. There were a huge gang of armed men, and he, on the ground, writhing in agony and screaming in pain, as they continued to tase the shit out of him, was not okay. It evoked from me a natural response to tell him to stop. When I did, this officer, understanding that the truth of what I was saying was making them look bad, chose to silence me with an assault. Now, the key point here is multiple. Number one, I'm completely unhurt. I didn't get a bruise or anything. Why? Well, he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to silence me. Note additionally that there was a gentleman standing right next to me. After I started shouting, he started shouting similar things. Stop hurting him, stop hurting him. And at once I was assaulted and silenced. The guy next to me was silenced as well. It's a real-time instance of the chilling effect. When a government official uses force and threats of additional force, which are implicit in the giving of orders, which I was required to follow arbitrarily. Of course, I'm not going to disobey the officer. Once he struck me and shouted things at me at the same time. Obviously, he wanted me to go away. So I went backwards. But I was like, oh my God, you assaulted me. Why did you assault me? Circumstances being what they were, obviously, it was pretty critical that I be able to speak in that moment. It's like the speech, to the extent that the speech was designed to impact the individuals there, their conscience, and hopefully affect some meaningful change. In other words, get the cops to stop tasing him a little sooner than they otherwise would have. My opportunity to have that speech be effective is limited to a brief window of time. I would hope I actually did affect some change, and they probably did stop a little sooner because I was shouting those things. It was my hope. I don't know if that's the case or not. But my goal is to sue the individual officer because he's the only one culpable for any wrongdoing. The city didn't do anything, and assuming that the city is cooperative here and is operating in good faith in the interests of justice and not in the interests of knee-jerk defense of any city official or employee for anything that they do, then you'll agree, the city will agree, that they're not the ones responsible, and that they should support me on the issue of qualified immunity. Now, if you're familiar with the law on qualified immunity and the case law in general, foremost, we should note that it stems originally from the Civil Rights Act that was right after the Civil War. So it's like a Reconstruction Act or something like that. And Section 1983 affords each citizen the right to sue any other individual citizen for rights violations. The Supreme Court interpreted, quote unquote, that this excludes judges and prosecutors. They have absolute immunity. And this is not obviously an interpretation of the law. This is simply writing law by a case law. But regardless, is what we're stuck with, and we have to live with it. They've additionally afforded police officers qualified immunity. And they've set the standard by which you can quash that qualified immunity and proceed with a lawsuit against an individual officer very narrowly. They've construed acceptable instances of rights violations that open up the officer to a lawsuit as an entirely minuscule set of possible ways. One of the criteria is that it's got to be a named right that the Supreme Court has upheld to be subject to this situation. So in this instance, I do have a named right. It's namely my right to free speech, and it was violated via assault. Now, note that we don't have a named right to bodily integrity. We don't have a named right that says you can't be assaulted. So he could assault the shit out of me. I wouldn't be able to sue him unless it shocks the conscience. That's another standard that you could meet and potentially. So if it's not a named right, but it shocks the conscience, so that say a cop tortures you or something, well, then that opens them up to individual lawsuits. But that's clearly not the case here. Note that nothing the officer did shocks the conscience. It shocks my sense of patriotism. It shocks my faith in America. The country was founded on the notion that I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And that an officer of the law would have so little regard for our foundational principles as to silence a citizen speaking out against what is clearly a wrongdoing committed by a group of government officials is a textbook example of a free speech right being violated. Now, note, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals hasn't even upheld the idea that filming a public official in the commission of their duties is a constitutional right. So the actual issue of can you film the cops is not uniformly agreed upon by the courts. It's broadly agreed upon, however, and all the other circuit courts of appeal have sided with the right to film. But that's not the right he violated here. And this is important. So it's even more fit than that, because the right he violated was not my right to film. When I was just standing there filming and not shouting at the cops, he had no problem with me standing there. He was just like, well, this guy's on the correct side of the line, so I'm not going to bother him. But as soon as I started shouting to the cops the truth, as soon as I started speaking truth to power, that's when he decided to assault and silence me. And the guy next to me via the chilling effect. So it fits on that criterion. Now, there are some other functional criteria you have to meet. And whether this is part of explicitly case law or just tradition that is sort of unstated, I'm not sure. But basically you have to incur real harms. So, in other words, if you're subjected to an illegal search, you can't sue the cop for the illegal search, even though he violated a named right that's been sort of upheld in some instances, because either he didn't find anything, in which case you incurred no harms, presumably, or he did find something, in which case, if the search is illegal, your remedy for that is excluding the evidence in trial. So they can't use that evidence against you. That's the remedy provided by the courts. Well, in this instance, I did incur harms. I was actually prevented from speaking, and since speaking was my intended goal, that the value of that speech is the harm I incurred. I've argued since this had occurred that it was worth at least $1,000 to me. That if somehow they had been able to stop time in the middle of torturing that guy and say, okay, Eric, we're going to either silence you or you can pay us $1,000 and you can continue speaking truth during the duration of this. Neither of us knows how long it's going to go on. Could go on for 1 more minute, could go on for 20 more minutes. So, what do you want? Do you want to pay the $1,000 to have the privilege to speak? Wouldn't be a right anymore because I'd have to pay for it. But do you want to pay for the privilege to speak, or would you like to be coerced by use of violence to silence? If you do speak, it will subject you to violence. I would pay the $1,000. I wasn't going to sit there and endure the unpleasantness. I mean, that's the thing, is it was exceedingly unpleasant to me and surprising and shocking and appalling that this person was screaming in agony and they don't stop what they're doing. Like, they're okay with continuing to cause all this pain, and they're okay with the sound of his agonized wails, and it doesn't tickle their conscience. That doesn't. My calling them out on it did. And they have no right to silence me at all. It is absolutely a violation of my named and upheld constitutional right. It did actual harms, and you can see it because the Supreme Court has indicated what harms look like. Harms look like, for example, the chilling effect. Well, you can see it in that video. So there's a named harm even. And besides that, the specifics of the situation meant that they took from me what they cannot return to me. An illegal search, for example, of your car, if it turns up nothing, then they took nothing from you that they can't return to you except your dignity and a few minutes of your time. That's not the case here. They took from me the opportunity to effect meaningful change via absolutely protected political expressive speech spoken aloud too. So there's zero chance that they can parse out some sort of minor distinction that doesn't qualify this as an example of a named rights violation. So obviously, you might say this cop assaulted the wrong guy, quote unquote, but that's not actually true. He assaulted the right guy because I want to sue him for $1,000 based on the valuing metric I provided there. I probably could get more, but what I really want to do is set the precedent that here is a way that they can violate your rights that actually does subject them to individual legal action. And the reason I want to do that is because cities ought not be held accountable for the actions of their police officers or any other individual. Individuals should be held accountable for their own wrongdoing, and that's it. Now, I understand some situations an organization's protocols may be so awful and so wrongly instructive that it makes sense to punish the organization as well. That's not the case here. I'm quite confident that the city of Pomona is not encouraging their police officers to silence citizens in the execution of their free speech rights. Now, I could be proved wrong. I could be encouraged to think otherwise if I get a whole lot of pushback from the city on this. It's in the city's interest to sever their own liability from that of the officer. And it's not in the officer's interest to have that happen, obviously, so he's going to fight the qualified immunity quashing motion. But or it's not really a motion. I think the way you do it is you have to file the lawsuit first, and then the judge basically says you can't sue him because he's a cop, and then you have to establish that it meets those criteria. But I can easily do that. So once I find the name of the cop, then I will begin those proceedings. And since it's only $1,000, I guess it'll be in small claims court. I'm not sure. I'd like to talk to the city attorney. I'm not an attorney myself, so I would like for him to be on my team here and working with me to come to a just and easily attained outcome here. However, it is critically important for me that the cop fight the qualified immunity thing so I can get a precedent on it. I want precedent on qualified immunity. That's what I'm hoping to attain here more than anything else. The $1,000 is appropriate because it's appropriate, it's just, and also it sends a message to individual police officers that, you can't do shit. You're not an aristocrat. You don't get to hit the peasant whenever you feel like it and get away with it. And whereas the peasant could never hit you, right? If I had gone up and assaulted that cop, as I've said in a previous video, I'd be lucky to be alive. And if I did live, I'd be facing a lot of jail time. And so, I don't want to live in a place where the lords get to rape and kill and damage people and get away with it, and the peasants get to take it and shut up. Fuck no. Fuck no. So, that's why I'm pursuing this. There has to be some manner of accountability. I haven't called internal affairs yet because I want to talk to the city attorney first. But if I don't get through, if I'm unable to get a response from them today, then I'll probably call internal affairs and see if I can. Maybe they're more reasonable. It's like I'm not trying to railroad anybody. I'm not trying to be anti-police. I'm not trying to be pro-litigation or any of those things. I'm trying to be an American citizen doing his patriotic duty to help this country restore its citizens' democracy to something that it ought to be, one in which individuals are mutually respectful towards other individuals, and individuals are accountable for their actions. If we don't have accountability, we will necessarily always have corruption, violence, wrongdoing, and injustice ensue. The light of day is the clearest and best way to sustain a citizen democracy's vigor. And police departments' long-standing habits of obfuscation and of an insular refusal to apply the same standards they apply to others to themselves, it's time for that to stop. It's time for us all to remember that we are all citizens. The cops, us, the criminals, everybody. And that people are people. People make mistakes and don't deserve to be fucking thrown under the bus for it. They deserve to be accountable for it, though. And so I'm going to try to demonstrate throughout this whole process the exact behavior that I think we all should be demonstrating in comparable circumstances. The city attorney and the police department and everybody. Which is, what's right? What's just? What's our patriotic duty here as Americans? Are we going to stand behind what makes this country great? Or are we going to stand behind an individual who's acting as though he lives in feudal Europe? Oh my lord. May I speak? No, fuck that. It's America, goddammit. I was raised by a father who thought that the courts were our saviors. I was raised by a father who showed me the movie Skokie, which is about Skokie, Illinois, and the Supreme Court ruling that they had to let the Nazis march, as a celebratory moment in American history. We may hate what you have to say, but we defend to the death your right to say it. Even if you're a Nazi. You may be stupid, but that's a good thing to get your stupidity out there. It puts it into the marketplace of ideas where it gets its just comeuppance. Bad arguments don't sustain muster in the light of day. That's why people who are guilty of things always want to not talk about it. Not just, no, I have no information for you. So hopefully the city's not like that. Hopefully the city has information for me. I'd like him to give me the name of the police officer. I'd like him to talk to me about strategy as far as getting this qualified immunity quashed. He's the attorney, so I don't doubt that he's got some very useful information that I don't have. I'm not an attorney. And I'm just repeating myself now. So that's the gist of this, and there you go, everybody. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And Pomona, I'm looking forward to a civil and hopefully mutually respectful and justice-seeking exchange with you guys. Justice-seeking, not adversarial. I'll be adversarial with the cop's lawyer. That's fine, because that's an adversarial process, and I'll be the respondent in a civil litigation. But there's no reason for me to be anything but civil with the city, because they should be on my team here.